Wow. Think about the kit that we started with in 1978. When we released Being Boiled on Fast Records, I think we owned a System 100, a Korg 700S, and a Revox tape recorder. That was it. We didn't have a mixing desk even. And a microphone, of course, which I think was just a SM58 at the time. And we used to bounce from track to track in mono, adding a different layer each time. And that's how the original Being Boiled was made. And actually a lot of the aficionados who like the kind of atmosphere and the simplicity and the minimalism of that period still refer to the original Being Boiled as an iconic track. In fact, I played it recently at a DJ night in Birmingham called Only After Dark, which is a kind of 80s obsessive crowd, and that got the biggest reaction of the night, and it cost about £2.50 to make, I think. Of course, as soon as we got a record contract with Virgin, we started spending the money on proper mixing desks, and we used to have an Ampex 8-track 1-inch tape machine to record onto, on which only 6 of the tracks worked. So when we started moving on to recording stuff for reproduction, the demos anyway, and some of the stuff for the second album with the Human League, we were definitely more, it was still very analog. I mean, everything that we recorded was very oriented. We composed it on the fly by assembling the compositions on tape. And I've really kept to that methodology through the years, even though it's now obviously much easier to do with digital. And we bought more and more synthesizers as the years went by, and usually had to trade them in to get bigger and better ones, what we thought were bigger and better. Biggest mistake I ever did was selling a Jupiter 8 to get a DX7, I think. In fact, or the D50, actually, Yamaha D50. And I think that was the kind of the beginning of the end of my love affair with new synthesizers, was when it moved into FM synthesis, which I never really got on with very well. I like a lot of the recreations of vintage synths digitally now. I use a lot of those in my compositions just because it's easier. But we still do go back occasionally and sample not so much MIDI sync, but sample original sounds from some original pieces of kit. As I mentioned, the Korg 700S and the System 100 are my two favourites. I still use analog synths in our composition. I've just done a new British Electric Foundation album where we've used, on a couple of tracks, we've used the Roland System 100, which was the first synth I ever had. Together with a friend of mine called Brian Duffy, who's from a band called the Modified Toy Orchestra. He's also got a System 100, and between us we've created a piece for Kim Wilde, which is a cover version of a song called Every Time I See You I Go Wild, an old Northern Soul tune, which is composed entirely monophonically using a Roland System 100. It's like about 100 tracks of stuff. It was quite difficult to do, as you can imagine. So yes, very interested in that. Still use the original Korg 700S, which was, actually got that before the System 100. And wish I'd not got rid of all my older analog stuff, because back in the day, what used to happen was, because of finances usually, and because we didn't have the storage facilities, we generally kind of almost like it's like parts exchanging cars. You don't keep every car you ever driven, although I don't drive, but you generally trade up, and so over the years, it'd be quite interesting to do a list of the synthesizers that I have owned. There's quite a lot of them. I use a lot of the Arturia recreations. Very fond. This is really weird, actually. I never owned a Moog, a real Moog, in my life. I've always been a big fan of Walter Carlos, and of course Kraftwerk. And but Moog always symbolised something different to me, which was they were quite expensive, and also they were quite musicianly in a lot of ways. Even though the actual filters and the oscillators were fantastic quality, I felt uncomfortable about entering into the world of Moog. It just reminded me of like 70s prog rock, really, which I quite like myself. But there was something about this slightly off-centered weirdness of Japanese synthesis that really appealed to me more. Roland, obviously, and Korg were the main two. And so I kind of feel very loyal to them. I think there were shortcomings of the way they sounded across the years, but actually they've always maintained a kind of level of strangeness, which I quite liked. However, the Arturia version of the Moog modular I use all the time. It's really strange. I think it's because it's cheap, or nearly free, actually. If you think about it, you can use as many instances as you want of this incredible machine. I mean, the functionality that you can get out of a Moog modular plug-in would have cost you literally tens of thousands of pounds in the past, and let alone the trouble of replugging everything. So for me, Moog has become a much more usable option now that it's virtual. At one point I was interested in kind of retrofitting MIDI to my analog pieces. So I had like a Roland Pro Mars, I had a Roland Jupiter 4 which had no MIDI on it. So I got that retrofitted with some Kenton MIDI kit, and then I had an outboard Kenton kit for the System 100. And I used it not very much, to be honest. I kind of like the kind of hands-on, the kind of messiness of the non-MIDI connection. So I as soon as kind of really the sampling element of everything got a lot simpler, I just sampled bits that I wanted.